Welcome back to the God Pill. Today we'll be going over Kyojiro Kagenuma's third essay on the female psychosis, where he breaks down solipsism. Okay, here is where things get a little tricky. With egocentrism and narcissism, there are a lot of articles in the literature that support my findings. Solipsism, however, is not science, but a concept based on philosophy. There is literature about it, but much like philosophy, it really depends on how well the topic is presented and discussed. In this way, solipsism is open to many interpretations, which I wholeheartedly welcome. My aim for this article is to convince you of my definition of solipsism and attempt to prove that women are solipsistic to varying degrees. Hopefully, I am able to give you, the reader, something worthwhile to consider. Before I begin, I also need to make a few caveats. Solipsism is not a psychological concept. It started out as an idea. Blue pillars contend that this means solipsism is not a behavioral trait. Yeah, well, sort of. But if we agree solipsism as an idea, then we can also agree that it can be a state of mind. Hence, it also has psychological implications and applications. And so in the process of making solipsism relevant to us, I will borrow philosophical terms to explain approximately and accurately, to the best of my abilities, what solipsism is, in the same spirit that we, throughout history, continue to invent and redefine terms to describe phenomena that we frequently encounter, such as gravity, black holes, surfing, selfies, Googling, etc. I am the one and only nobody I'd rather be. I have read a lot of definitions for solipsism. Some say it's extreme egocentrism, while some equate it to extreme narcissism. I think philosophers tend to agree on the understanding of solipsism, as Descartes' cogito ergo. I am the one and only nobody I'd rather be. I have read a lot of definitions for solipsism. Some say it's extreme egocentrism, while some equate it to extreme narcissism. I think philosophers tend to agree on the understanding of solipsism as Descartes' cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. Descartes was in the view that the individual understands all psychological concepts such as thinking, willing, perceiving, by analogy with his mental state. This led Descartes to doubt the existence of the world he perceived, and he retreated to the only thing that he could not doubt, his own conscious self, Maston 2008. I find this to be the best definition of solipsism, and so I would like to use it. Solipsism is to doubt the existence of the world that the person perceives, and retreating to the only thing the person does not doubt, her own conscious mind. In the context of the nature of existence and justified belief, solipsism is positioned the mind is the only thing that can be known to be true, and that knowledge of anything outside the mind is unjustified. That is just a fancy way of saying that solipsism means, I believe I'm the only one that is right based on what only I know, so you must be wrong even if you can prove you are right. Unlike a narcissist who believes that your existence is only for her pleasure, or an egocentric who thinks you are her fan, to the solipsist, your arguments are relatively meaningless and only she can prove herself wrong, but she cannot doubt her own self because she believes that only her mind is meaningful. If you have ever argued with a woman, you will appreciate this axiom. This is why many people misconstrue solipsism with narcissism and egocentrism. On the surface, it seems the person is arrogant or self-absorbed, but that is not the case. Arrogance implies that she sees everyone as a threat to shame her, and self-absorbed implies she engages in her own deluded fantasy. The solipsistic does not acknowledge you as a threat because you are meaningless to her. The solipsistic also engages the real world, but rejects anything that she does not agree with, and any evidence contrary to her liking is dismissed. Oh yeah, it's total bullshit, but you have to appreciate the utter fuckery of it all. And as evidence, here is a video of Chelsea explaining the meaning of miles per hour. Okay, yes, this is hilarious, but do note the underlying salient point here. This woman is convinced that she is right. Key phrases such as, you don't make sense, I make sense, and you don't know the answer, you're guesstimating like I'm guesstimating, shows that Chelsea from the video had no doubt in her mind that she was correct. This is not something that you get from mere egocentrism or narcissism. No, this sense of unconditional trust to one's own mind in the face of overwhelming evidence is akin to religious, fanatical, blind faith, and that is exactly what solipsism is. There will be people out there who are going to say, come on, she's just dumb. This is inaccurate. Real stupidity implies learning disability. Chelsea understood the question before trying and failing beautifully to solve it, because she could only conceptualize the problem by analogy to her own experience. If I run a mile in 9 minutes, but if I'm in shape, it's 7 minutes. No, what she had is a steadfast faith that the correct answer to the question lies within her own personal thoughts and experiences, and not from scientific conclusions or deductive reasoning. This can be an argument why women are so underrepresented in STEM fields. Solipsistic women are unable to conceptualize and are skeptical of abstractions that are bigger and far removed from their perspectives, such as science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. This type of baseless trust is the same as the belief in the paranormal and superstition, but instead of a belief in the phenomenon in the absence of evidence, solipsism doubts everything even when there is solid proof. This is why solipsism is the worst of all possible bullshit philosophy, and the reason people think philosophers are jackasses. Brown, 2007. Now, that is not to say that solipsism, narcissism, and egocentrism are not related. They definitely are. If egocentrism is a thought process, and narcissism is a behavioral trait, solipsism, then, is a principal tenet. If narcissism mutated from a child's relativistic hedonism, solipsism is derived from a child's egocentric morality of constraints. Where the child If narcissism mutated from a child's relativistic hedonism, solipsism is derived from a child's egocentric morality constraints. Crosser, 2014. Where the child is rigid in morals and rules with the exception of herself, transfigured into a dogmatic and zealous trust of one's own mind, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. There's only right and wrong, morality constraints. I only know that I'm in right, so that means you're always wrong, solipsism. I don't want to see you. Flanagan, 1991, wrote that Piaget was of the opinion that an infant perceives the world as full of objects that go in and out of view, which therefore, from her perspective, go in and out of existence. Flanagan went on to mention that a child under 8 years old behaves like a metaphysical idealist, morality constraints, and an epistemological relativist, relativistic hedonism, where she frequently mistakes between what appears to be reality and her perspective as the perspective. A cat 5 feet away is bigger than the car 50 feet away, so the cat is bigger. This is what is called infant solipsism, and all children are somewhat solipsistic. To apply this to our context, I would like to introduce a similar concept called infantile solipsism, which is when a woman perceives the world as full of appliances that go up and down in terms of its use to her, which therefore from her perspective can go from meaningful to meaningless. Now, please take a moment to consider the above statement if, from her perspective, something is considered as meaningless. That means that thing does not exist, at least in her mind. Infantile solipsism is, you only see what you want to see, although that is only half of it because you also won't see what you don't want to see. This can explain why some people, especially narcissists, have difficulty empathizing with others. If you are meaningless to her, then all your actions are meaningless. It also explains why a woman can easily dismiss obvious evidences so easily. If something is meaningless, then it does not exist, and conversely, if she perceives something as non-existent, then every meaningful detail attached to that thing is null. How do we prove this? 2 words. 2 words. Male privilege. In part 2 of my series, I examine the narcissism exhibited by the British suffragettes movement of 1906. Remember, narcissism is the behavior and not the belief. The suffragettes believed that they were oppressed by not being able to vote at a time when 60% of men could not vote either. Man-woman myth, 2010. You see, to the feminists and suffragettes, they perceived these men were meaningless and worthless, so they did not exist. These women only saw the men who owned land, hence they believed that all men owned land and could vote, and thus were oppressing women, while not acknowledging the majority of men who could not vote too. But when the First World War started and they needed men to fight, Emmeline and her daughter Christabel Pankhurst saw a use for these men who could not vote and shamed them to die for the war. It was their deaths and not their lives that were meaningful to the feminists. These men were still worthless in their infantile solipsist view. And this is why there is such a thing as male disposability. Because women view men as worthless, they are then disposable. This is why when the Titanic sank, only women and children and not men were put on lifeboats and were saved. Strahan, 2011. That is why when men die in coal mines, no one gives a damn. This is veterans of war repeatedly abandoned by their country after they have served them honorably. It is due to this female solipsistic belief that the majority of men are meaningless and worthless. Infantile solipsism is also the principal belief behind the sense of entitlement. A woman only sees those who are wealthier than her. She becomes envious, and she wants that wealth for herself. not acknowledging that there are many people around her that are not as well off as she is. She only feels her wants, and that is being entitled for a luxurious lifestyle. Her belief in this sense of self-entitlement drives her to search for ways to achieve that goal, which leads to hypergamy. What? Not all women are like that. Here's a clip from the other side of the world. And we know that women all over the world are hypergamous because a study conducted worldwide across 37 cultures strongly supports the position that women prefer marriage partners who either have or have the potential to obtain social status and control material resources. Bus 1989. This study included that women rated good financial prospects higher than did men in all cultures. Hence, most women are hypergamous, and this belief that they deserve a luxury stems from their self-absorbed, envious, infantile perspective that they are entitled to such things. You're not entitled to anything that you don't work for, but it does not stop there. Among the most fundamental belief that the woman ascribed to But it does not stop there. Among the most fundamental beliefs that the woman ascribed to is the belief that women are not actors in their own lives, but are acted upon, which is called female hypoagency, Ginkgo 2011. Women believe that they lack the ability to act, to affect things, and produce no effects, Thinking 8 TV 2012. Women only want to see men do things and do not want to see themselves doing it. This is infantile solipsism. And because they only want to believe this, they demand others, specifically men, do and act for them in what is termed as male hyperagency. Feminism then can be viewed as a belief system, a religion based on feminine tenets such as female hypoagency, where the feminazis cry victim to the Descartian-like evil demon fantasy that is the patriarchy, or the traditionalist maidens feign damseling to the gynocracy. Gynocentrism, then, is cultural male hyperagency, which is one of the most blatantly narcissistic exploitations by women. Gynocentrism includes the idea that men should slave and sacrifice themselves for women, and that women's dysfunctional behavior should be forgiven and forgotten, i.e., narcissists supply and the pussy pass. Feminism is the organized religion of female solipsistic psychosis that spawned and nurtured gynocentrism, which is cultural enslavement of men that includes sending men to their deaths during wartime. Gynocentrism is essentially the systemic gender violence and discrimination of men. Gynocentrism is misandry. And we can prove this misandry by looking at rape shield laws, where men cannot even defend themselves against a woman's accusations of rape, which was proven to be false, such as the Duke Lacrosse case, Appleborn 2007. We can also look at British Crime Survey that puts domestic violence against men by women in the UK at 40%, and how the society at large ignores this, Hoyle 2013. We can also look at how British society is so blatantly biased against fathers that 60% of households in cities such as Cardiff, Liverpool, and Sheffield is fatherless, Sauer 2013. All this proves that gynocentrism and feminism are both discriminatory and evil. Below is a graphical example of the relationship between egocentrism, narcissism, and solipsism. That concludes part 3 of Kyoj's essays on the female psychosis. If you've enjoyed this content or my original works, make sure to like, share, subscribe, donate, and comment if you're so inclined. Until next time, guys, stay grounded in reality, please.